$9 billion. That was the paper value of a blood testing startup that promised to change medicine with a single finger prick. One drop, hundreds of results, fast and cheap. It sounded like science fiction made simple. Then the truth surfaced, and with it, a haunting question. How many patients got wrong results while investors cheered? Think about your own life. If a lab told you that you were healthy when you were not, or sick when you were fine, what choices would you make? Careers, relationships, pregnancies can pivot on a lab report. We follow the rise and fall of Theranos, the company that sold a story, burned through trust, and left lives at risk. Stay with me. The device at the center of this saga hid a secret that turned hope into hazard years. Keep watching. In the early 2000s, a 19-year-old Stanford student named Elizabeth Holmes left school to found a company in Silicon Valley. Her pitch was simple and bold. A tiny fingerstick could replace the vials drawn from a vein. She said a single drop would power a compact machine that could run many tests at once. Less pain, lower cost, faster decisions. This was the Theranos promise. Investors loved the vision. The company raised hundreds of millions of dollars from wealthy families and well-known figures. The private valuation climbed into the billions. At its peak, Theranos was worth $9 billion on paper. Holmes was featured on magazine covers and compared to celebrated founders. Confidence filled rooms. Questions faded. Yes, now reporters praised disruption. Investors saw a bet. Theranos courted retailers. Walgreens and Safeway signed deals to build blood draw centers near store pharmacies. The idea was to put lab testing where people already shop. In Arizona, pilot sites opened inside Walgreens stores. Doctors would order tests, store workers would collect fingerstick samples, and Theranos would deliver quick results. To the outside world, this looked like the future. The board of directors looked like a cabinet room. Former secretaries, a former general, a former senator. They were not lab experts. They were famous and influential leaders who opened doors. Behind the scenes, Theranos built a slick narrative around a secret machine. The machine had a name that sounded like a wizard, the Edison. It was presented as a compact box able to run many common lab tests from very small samples. The company claimed a streamlined process, a finger prick, a cartridge, a sealed run, and a digital result. To a patient, this meant less veer and less time. To a health system, this meant lower costs and wider access. To a politician, this meant innovation and economic growth. The story checked every box for a feel-good transformation. Here is the cliffhanger. The more Theranos grew, the less it showed. Partners signed, patients came. Yet the core technology stayed hidden from independent experts. That secrecy would soon collide with a question no public relations plan could silence. Did the machine truly work as promised day after day on real patients with real stakes? Here is how the promise broke once it met reality. Fingerstick blood is not the same as vein blood. It clots fast and carries tissue fluid that can skew numbers. Accurate lab work needs stable samples, validated methods, and instruments that pass daily checks. Theranos said its compact box could do that with a tiny drop. Inside, staff saw repeated failures. The Edison machine missed quality control, the routine test that proves a device is fit for use. When the drop was too small, teams diluted samples with liquid to hit volume targets. Dilution shifts concentration and can turn normal into false alarm or hide real danger. To keep outputs flowing, Theranos routed many tests to commercial analyzers built for larger samples. Those analyzers were not validated for tiny fingersticks. The mix of diluted samples and borrowed machines produced reports that looked official, yet wobbled under scrutiny. Behind the glass, the workflow jammed. Cartridges stuck. Calibrations drifted. Reruns piled up. Validation, the proof that a test is accurate and precise, was narrow. The company picked easy targets and limited the menu it claimed to run on the box. Whistleblowers Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz warned that patients could be harmed. They described voided results and games with proficiency testing, the outside check that compares one lab to its peers. According to accounts, Theranos sent split samples in a way that shielded the Edison from direct comparison, which defeats the point of the check. Meanwhile, the sales story grew. Retail partners believed they were offering modern science in everyday stores. Public messages implied rugged reliability and hinted at military interest. Inside the lab, the rulebook mattered more and more. In the United States, labs that test human samples must follow the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments. These rules set standards for methods, staff, and quality checks, and they allow inspectors to review records. Documents later showed gaps. Titles did not match duties. A director signed while engineers changed protocols. Night shifts pushed backlogs through stalling devices. Secrecy covered the cracks. Visitors were escorted. Slides were controlled. Even the board got only curated updates. The culture prized loyalty and speed. People who pressed for safeguards met pressure from managers and lawyers. The valuation soared, the stakes rose, and the risk moved from investors to patients. Then came a force the company could not redirect. A dogged reporter began to ask for proof, not stories. The next segment reveals how those questions reached the bedside and forced action. Steps mattered. First, collect a tiny drop. Second, load a cartridge. Third, fire a run. Each step adds noise. Quality control exists to catch that noise. It uses materials that prove stability. When those controls fail, a lab should stop and investigate. At Theranos, speed often won. The goal was to deliver results fast, to satisfy partners and keep the story alive. That trade put mission over measurement, and it set the stage for harm. The first crack became a line when a newspaper investigation asked simple questions. A reporter at a major business daily spoke with insiders and doctors and compared the public story against lab reality. He asked which tests ran on the Edison, which tests ran on commercial machines, and how validation was done. Sources described dilution, reruns, and secrecy. Theranos pushed back with lawyers and public relations. But the questions kept landing on the bench where samples met instruments. Then the regulators arrived. State and federal teams inspected the labs and reviewed proficiency testing and quality control. They found serious problems. In 2016, a federal agency moved to revoke the main lab certification and to bar Elizabeth Holmes from owning or operating a lab for 2 years. That sanction is rare and severe. It signals that patient safety is at risk until fixes are proven. Arizona patients began to receive notices that many results were void. Doctors had to redo tests. Treatment plans shifted. Walgreens closed the blood draw centers and ended the partnership. The brand that once promised convenience now faced a basic question of trust. Courts collected evidence. Records showed how internal worries clashed with external claims. Email threads documented pressure to meet timelines and to expand before the science was ready. Former employees described intimidation and legal threats. Families of patients described the fear that comes when a report says danger and a later test says all clear. Theranos hired famous lawyers and issued strong statements. Yet the data trail told a different story. The more investigators looked, the more the methods failed to defend themselves. The cliffhanger is personal. This was no longer about a pitch deck or a valuation. It was about a young mother who changed medication based on a bad number, a worker who feared a clot after a false alarm, a student who lost sleep over a false result. These stories persuaded jurors and judges that the gap between the promise and the practice was wide. The next minutes take us into the courtroom and into the numbers that followed the fall. Inspectors at the Food and Drug Administration reviewed the collection tube and found it was not cleared, a blow to claims of readiness for wide use. The collapse moved from headlines to courtrooms. In 2018, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission charged Elizabeth Holmes and Ramesh Balwani with massive fraud. Holmes settled civil claims without admitting or denying, agreed to pay $500,000, return shares, and accept a 10-year bar from serving as an officer or director of a public company. Federal prosecutors also filed criminal charges. In 2022, a jury found Holmes guilty on investor counts. She was sentenced in late 2022 to more than 11 years in prison, and she reported to custody in 2023. Balwani was convicted and received a longer term. Theranos dissolved. Walgreens ended the partnership and pursued claims. Safeway wrote off investments. Investors lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Patients carried the weight of uncertainty, and some had to retest and rebuild trust with their doctors. Regulators drew lessons on lab quality and enforcement. The Food and Drug Administration stressed clear pathways for devices that change how samples are collected. In the United Kingdom, regulators oversee device safety and lab quality. Both systems depend on transparency, documented validation, and independent review. Yet the core finding remained. Claims outran facts, and patients bore the risk. Here is the final turn. Theranos was not only a tale of greed, it was a case of group belief. People wanted the story to be true, and that desire dulled judgment. What should you take away? Demand proof that matches the promise. A device must show validation on real samples and clear limits. If you see secrecy and stage-managed demos, assume risk until evidence is public. In the United States, investor claims face the Securities and Exchange Commission, and lab quality follows national rules. In the United Kingdom, regulators oversee devices and labs. When speed outruns safety, people get hurt. Reward teams that wait for data. If a result feels wrong, ask for a redraw or a second method. Separate vision from verification. Vision inspires, verification saves lives. If you want more investigations, subscribe to Money Mystery, share this episode, and suggest the next case in the comments.